Everyone, welcome back to Brazil Crypto Report, a podcast produced by Activo Media and Advisory. I'm your host, Aaron Stanley, and today I'm joined by Gui Gomes, who's the CEO of OranjeBTC, which earlier this month publicly listed on the B3 exchange in Brazil to become the largest Bitcoin treasury company in Latin America. Before we dive into that, I want to give a quick shout out to our show sponsor, Avenia, which is building seamless infrastructure for cross-border payments in the Americas. We'll be hearing a bit more about them later in the show. So yeah, let's jump in. Gui, thanks so much for being here today.
Hey, Aaron, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invite.
Absolutely. Pleasure is all mine. So really excited to dive in today. To start off, maybe just give us the elevator pitch. Like, what are you building with OranjeBTC?
So OranjeBTC is the first listed company in Latin America fully dedicated to Bitcoin and the Bitcoin standard. We have the mission to drive Bitcoin adoption in the region. It's a region that, in my perspective, needs Bitcoin the most. So we are beginning our journey with two key mandates. A lot of Bitcoin education, so people can understand the best asset ever created, and building our Bitcoin treasury. As you mentioned, we're already the largest Bitcoin holder in the region, and we expect to continue to grow that treasury over the long term. So that's a little bit of what we're doing here.
I'd love to talk a bit more about just kind of your background and how you arrived at this point. You've got a pretty interesting career background. You spent some time in the hedge fund world and then also the Bitcoin world, and Orange seems like sort of a nice merger of those two worlds. But maybe tell us a bit about kind of your journey and like, why did you decide to launch a Bitcoin treasury company?
Sure. So I'm Brazilian, born and raised, spent most of my life in São Paulo, Brazil. Went to law school and started my first company during college years. Ran that business for about 7 years, and eventually was time to move to the US, get closer to finance and technology. My goal at the time was to get exposure to what was going on in the Silicon Valley and all the tech scene here in the US, and eventually bring a new idea, a new concept back home. And went to California to do business school. That's when I met Bitcoin for the first time. But out of business school, instead of going back home or coming up with a new idea, I joined the hedge fund world. I joined Bridgewater Associates, which is a hedge fund out of Connecticut. Ray Dalio is the founder, became one of the largest names in finance. And Ray was transitioning from CEO, CIO, founder, the main person within that firm, into the chairman of the board. And he put together kind of an internal strategy group to help him through that transition. I joined that group, spent about 1 year working on the specific project of Ray Dalio transitioning to the board, but spent most of my time at Bridgewater helping the company to grow internationally. In this new phase of the company, post-Ray, the new strategic direction was to grow into Asia, Latin America, and Europe. So we put together a business development, a growth unit. I joined that unit and spent about 3 years helping to distribute Bridgewater strategies across the world. But as I mentioned, I got into Bitcoin back in 2016. Went really deep into the rabbit hole, as it says, from essentially 17 to 2020. By 2020, my conviction was all-time high, essentially transitioned all my portfolio into Bitcoin. And then by 2022, it was time for me to jump heads on and help the industry. And that's when I left Bridgewater to join Swan Bitcoin, a Bitcoin-only platform in the US, help Americans, business and individuals to buy Bitcoin. I joined as Chief Revenue Officer, eventually became president of the company, spent about 3 years in that firm. But last summer, July, August of 2024, was time for me to go back into building mode, be a founder, entrepreneur again. And that's when I started OranjeBTC.
A couple of follow-up questions to that, but going back to the Bridgewater days, I'm really curious, like, what was it like working with Ray Dalio? Because I know he was, during that period, he was kind of dabbling into Bitcoin. He was starting to understand it. I don't think he was necessarily fully, convicted that this is the future, but he was at least interested in it. And it kind of, there's a nice angle between Bitcoin and the kind of the big picture power shifts that he's really famous for kind of foreseeing. But would love some insight into like what was it like working with him, and how did that maybe even shape your appreciation for Bitcoin ultimately?
Yeah, I think like was really important in my Bitcoin journey. Like raised a big mind, right? And at the time, he was writing the book about the changing world order, right? And he was talking about the cycles of that and how superpowers come to be and how can you track them through education and army and commerce, and those eventually rise to become the world superpowers, and eventually their currencies become the reserve currency of the globe. But through too much debt, mismanagement, eventually those nations fail and new nations emerge. So Ray was really deep into that process of his thinking, and he was working on the book and publishing chapters of his book on a monthly basis and sharing those chapters internally so Bridgewater employees could review, give feedback, and get a sense about what he was working on. And that was critical on shaping of my thinking, because I used to live in Manhattan, work in Connecticut, was on 1 hour and 15 minutes each way. So I'd go back and forth. I used to take a bus, listening about Bitcoin and podcasts and reading books. And once I got to Bridgewater, Bridgewater is well known for its like world-class research department. So every single day, Bridgewater puts out a research paper, just sharing thoughts about what was going on across the globe. And Ray was working on his book. So just comparing the Bitcoin philosophy and the concept of hard money and this new technology, and what Ray was saying, which really marries what the Bitcoin community believes, that essentially the US dollar will no longer be the world reserves currency, that these currencies come and go, and there will be a transition eventually. And in Ray's perspective, China would emerge as the world's superpower, and eventually China's currency would run the globe. And then, on my perspective, say, why would we make the same mistake again? Now that we have a decentralized ledger that is fully digital and then was designed to be a reserve currency of the globe. So that's why I say, hey, you know what? This really validates Bitcoin value proposition. What Ray is seeing, what Bridgewater is commenting on, is essentially what Satoshi Nakamoto also saw. And that's when my conviction was formed. And essentially I said, hey, there's nothing more important in life than helping Bitcoin to succeed and helping for this new currency to become the world's reserve currency. So essentially, that's when I left the forum, joined the Bitcoin community full time, and have been working on Bitcoin ever since.
I love that. I have a small like sort of sidebar story just to add on, because back when I worked at CoinDesk I worked from CoinDesk until like 2021 ish. And I used to run our consensus conference that used to be in New York every year, and then it's in Austin and moves around now. And then I think this was during 2021, during the COVID year. We were trying to it's like have to do a virtual conference because of COVID, right? So we were trying to kind of grasping at straws, like how can we make this interesting for people, right? And I just sent I somehow got like Ray Dalio's EA executive assistant's email or contact. I just sent like an invitation. I was like, hey, we'd love to have him come speak at our conference. Figure 0% chance of this actually happening, but hey, why not? And then like a week later, they wrote back saying, yeah, we'd love to. He accepted the invitation. So I was like, oh my gosh, this is actually, we have Ray Dalio speaking at a crypto conference. Like, what is going on here?
But it's interesting because what was happening behind the scenes was like we had a big bull market, right? And then Bridgewater is an investment firm, but is also a thought partner to its clients. And Bridgewater clients are the largest pools of capital around the globe. And every single CIO of these big firms were questioning themselves, okay, what about this new crypto wave? Like, what is this about? Is gaining some traction? Like, how should I think about it? So like internally, the company was getting a lot of questions about how one should think about Bitcoin as a asset within a portfolio construction exercise. So it was very, very early days, but again, it was the beginning of, I believe, institutional adoption of this new asset class.
Yeah, for me, it was like a moment where, I mean, because normally, I mean, we'd been, we're for 3 years had been like trying to recruit these like TradFi people to come speak at our conference, and it's like no, who wants to come speak at some like coin media thing or whatever? It's like people are like, who the heck are you, right? And then now it's like, okay, Ray Dalio is accepting our invitation. Like, okay, there must be something serious here. Like this, I think we're hovering over the target, so to speak. I'd like to take a moment to tell you about our show sponsor, Avenia. If you're building a wallet, a crypto consumer app, or a global payment platform, Avenia is your bridge to Latin America. You can instantly connect to PIX, SPAY, and CBU using stablecoins with a single API. No banks, no FX desks, no SWIFT. Head over to avenia.io to learn about how you can move money globally with full compliance and real-time settlement. Now back to the show. So, I mean, I think one thing that really stands out about you is that like you're a really like firm believer in Bitcoin itself. Like you're not just in this because it's like some new financial instrument you can trade and make money off of with whatever, financial engineering, but like you're in it like to win it, like full on Bitcoin standard. I mean, I guess I would just love for you to maybe talk a bit about like what excites you so much about this, and like, particularly in the context of Latin America.
Look, Aaron, it's one of the, and finally it's being recognized as such, but I think one of the largest inventions of all time. Like, this is incredible. Satoshi Nakamoto created a digital scarcity. And that allows you, through the network, with no counterparty, to move money and settle instantly. And this is one of the largest problems that humans have been facing since society has developed. Like, how can you store value and how can you transfer value in the most efficient way possible? Gold has done that job for many, many years, thousands of years. But gold is not built for a digital economy, right? And given the shortcomings of gold, the fiat standard, the fiat system that we know today came to be, right? The banks were holding gold, distributing like certificates of gold that would transition across the economy. And now that created a lot of counterparty risk. Now you're trusting the banks or the central banks to do what's right. And we're trusting a counterparty, essentially trusting people. And when financial incentives are involved, we know what people tend to do. They optimize for the short term instead of the long term. And then it creates a lot of critical problems in society that we see across the board, right? And Latin America has faced those challenges, I would argue, most than the rest of the world, right? It is these emerging economies, these developing economies that have a currency that is a derivative of the dollar, right? I like to say, if you think the Bitcoin is good for Americans, Bitcoin is great for Latin Americans, right? Because as an American, you live on the dollar system. So your currency is the currency that runs the world. As a Latin American, you live on the BRL or the pesos or whatever it is. So it's a derivative of the dollar. So all the problems that we see in the US with inflation and all of that exacerbates in Latin America. And this is a beautiful region with almost 1 billion people, with a lot of natural resources and a lot of hardworking people, but it's pretty hard to succeed when the system itself has some key issues. I fully believe that if we transition to a Bitcoin standard in which we have a neutral, digital, decentralized currency running the world, and commerce is open across nations, and no one is in control of the money printing machine, we will drastically enhance society as a whole, and Latin American in particular. So that's why it speaks very close to my heart. And it's something that I've seen with my own eyes. When I was a small kid living in Brazil, my parents used to get their paycheck and they would run to the grocery store, because if you did not spend every single dime in the first day, a week later, you'd buy 20% fewer goods. So, of course, hyperinflation is long gone in the region. Of course, Brazil and other nations in Latin America are much more stable, and they have really advanced over the past few decades. But the key issue is still in place. We're living in a monetary system that a few folks in the United States of America can print money at their own will, and the entire globe face the consequence. And there's an opportunity to change that system. Bitcoin is the solution, and I'm just trying to do my best to help it succeed.
Pivoting back to Orange here, I think it's a good segue back into the OranjeBTC project. But like, why did you decide that doing a Bitcoin treasury company in Brazil was maybe the best contribution you could do at the moment toward kind of fulfilling this vision?
Again, as I mentioned, we're more than a Bitcoin treasury company. We began with a treasury element, but we are a Bitcoin company operating in the Bitcoin standard, and our mission is to drive adoption in this region. And from our perspective right now, the most effective ways to drive adoption, one is education, right? Producing high quality content about Bitcoin, about the Bitcoin standard, about treasury companies, about everything that the Bitcoin ecosystem could bring to local economies, right? What you're doing day to day, educating through your podcast, we're just joining forces, right? We think there's more to do and we want to help. And the second pillar that we believe it is critical early on is to walk the talk, right? If I'm saying that Bitcoin is a revolutionary asset that could change financial systems as we know it, I don't want to only say it, I want to do it. And that's why we're building the treasury, because it shows our conviction. And we believe deeply that Bitcoin will succeed and will be not that long ago, not that long from here, $10 trillion asset class. And companies operating in this new standard and individuals operating this new standard will succeed. And along the journey, OranjeBTC will evolve, right? We're going to be eventually long term, we become a financial platform operating this new standard and building new products and services to help everyone on the Bitcoin standard to do whatever they want to do with their financial lives, right? People need loans, people need credit, people will need custody, payments, all that stuff. So the company will evolve always under the mission of driving adoption, but we begin with two key pillars: education and treasury.
I love the focus on education, right? Because I think that's one of the things that just on surface level, at least in my view, like differentiates you guys from some of these other Bitcoin treasury companies, which are just kind of pure financial speculative plays, right? And I would like to maybe take a step back and I'd love your thoughts on just kind of the whole Bitcoin treasury movement as a whole, because I know this is kind of like a controversial issue right now, because there's some people kind of questioning like how sustainable is this, and now that you've been on the inside of this for over a year now, I guess I'd like your thoughts on is this, what's maybe like the good, bad, and the ugly here, and like what maybe sets you guys apart. I mean, I think obviously the education focus and the adoption focus is something that I haven't really seen other people maybe super focused on, but I would love to maybe just get your thoughts on like why does like Brazil need a company like this in the way that you've designed it?
Let's go back to basics in here. Like Michael Saylor designed this model, right? And he's very open by saying it was defensive force. Sorry. It was defensive force. Bitcoin was a way for him to kind of save his company, right? Then it became opportunistic, and then strategic, and then transformational. And I think everyone who is paying attention will say he was extremely successful. He took a company that had a $1 billion market cap that was essentially forgotten by the market, and today is a 100 billion plus market cap company. And I believe it will become one of the largest companies in the US. I think he's on track to be north of $1 trillion in terms of market cap. So I think he was extremely successful doing so, right? And he was not only successful, he was loud and open source. Say, hey, that's what people should be doing. Like, everyone should be adopting the Bitcoin standard. This is the new model. Don't wait in line. Everyone should do it. And then we saw a new phase of companies doing something very similar, right? From MetaPlanet to Capital B and Standard Scientific, and even Tesla. Tesla put some Bitcoin on their balance sheet, a little bit following Saylor's steps, right? So, and again, hard to argue that MetaPlanet was not extremely successful. It was a $5 million company in May of last year, and it's now a multi-billion-dollar company and the largest holder of Bitcoin in Japan. And why is this company succeeding, and why I believe OranjeBTC will do extremely well? Because as of now, there's a lot of restrictions prohibiting that large pools of capital access Bitcoin or the Bitcoin ecosystem, right? Insurance companies, pension plans, asset managers with mandates. So essentially, and others don't want to have the full exposure of Bitcoin. It's too volatile. And if I'm planning to retire and I don't want to take the volatility, but I love to have 8% annual returns, and Bitcoin is giving you 50% annual return. So you don't need 50 because 50 comes with all the volatility, but I'll take 8 with little to no vol. Okay, you just solved someone's problem, right? So overall, I think these companies have done well so far, has been volatile, which again is part of the game. Many have joined the ecosystem, and I don't think all of them will succeed as anything else, right? The banking system was created hundreds of years ago. Many people tried their hands, and now we have one Bank of America, one Goldman Sachs, and one Itaú Bank. Many have tried and failed along the way. There was a lot of consolidation. And I think what we're seeing now is the emergence of a new industry. Michael Saylor was the first mover. Other companies followed. Some of them have already done extremely well, but overall it's still very new. But in the long term, if you believe Bitcoin will win, you should believe that companies operating on that standard will also win, right? The management saw this opportunity. The management took action. And if Bitcoin will be $1 million one day, and Saylor will have 1 million Bitcoin, that's a $1 trillion balance sheet. What can Michael Saylor, with a $1 trillion balance sheet and a strong brand, do in a market like the US market? And then you can apply the same model to MetaPlanet, Capital B, and OranjeBTC. If these companies continue to execute well, accumulate Bitcoin, and just let time do its thing with Bitcoin, they're set for success.
A quick follow-up to that, but like, this might be kind of like a sophomoric question, but like, how would you differentiate like what you guys are doing versus, because I know there's other companies in the region that have been doing the Bitcoin, Bitcoin on the balance sheet game, like Mercado Libre and also like Melius, and but these guys still have like other businesses aside from just Bitcoin, right? They have, obviously like other stuff, but they're just kind of think in the case of Melius, they're saying like basically all the cash flow we earn, we're going to basically just use to purchase Bitcoin, but they still have another business that they run. But like, I guess how would you distinguish like what you're doing from what maybe some of these other treasury companies that are not like pure play Bitcoin treasuries are doing?
First of all, I see all of them with extremely good eyes, right? Again, management saw the problem, found the solution, and took action, right? I do believe more and more companies will be adding Bitcoin to their balance sheets as public or private companies in the months and years to come. We also saw not that long ago, Figma, I believe, that went public in the US. And when they filed their paperwork, they said, hey, by the way, we have some Bitcoin on our balance sheet. So I think there'll be more and more common of companies doing that. I think the key differentiation from OranjeBTC is one, we were built for purpose, right? Like we started with the mission of driving Bitcoin adoption in this region and thinking what would be the most effective ways to do so from the get-go. And going back to what I mentioned, in our perspective, is a lot of education and then accumulating as much Bitcoin as possible. With that mission, we designed the entire company for that specific goal. So we're kind of built for purpose. So our capital structure was thought that way. Our investor base came because of Bitcoin, came because of the region, came to drive adoption. Everyone that we hired came from a Bitcoin mindset. The way we structure our cost base is all based on Bitcoin. So we think in Bitcoin terms, right? So we're not transitioning our model. We're not diversifying our risk. We're not taking a defensive action. It's the opposite. We're built that way. And I think other companies will add Bitcoin to their balance sheet. I hope other companies are built to operate on the Bitcoin standard as well. But as of now, in the entire Latin America, we are the only one who is public listed.
No, thank you for that. That makes a lot of sense. So basically, like so these other companies are kind of maybe dabbling, like they're putting Bitcoin, they're using Bitcoin maybe as more of like a hedging tool essentially. But like you guys are going like kind of full all in Bitcoin standard. Like that's maybe the easiest way to maybe articulate the difference. I'd like to ask you I'd like to maybe compare maybe kind of what you've seen in like the U.S. institutional markets versus here in Brazil. I know you've spent a lot of time in the U.S. obviously, and you know a lot of your investors in this company are U.S. investors. I mean, you have a really impressive list of investors like the Winklevoss twins and Ricardo Salinas and even Adam Back, right? Who some people think may have been Satoshi. You know, be that level of credibility. But Bitcoin's become like pretty institutionalized in the U.S. at this point. Like I think pretty much anybody who's in finance of any sort at least knows what Bitcoin is. They probably own a little bit or have at least dabbled with it in some way, have some exposure. I mean, how would you compare that what you see in the U.S. to maybe what we see in kind of the Faria Lima financial institutional community here in Brazil?
So interesting because I see two spectrums in terms of understanding, conviction, and exposure. I believe the US is a few years ahead, right? I think is unquestionable that BlackRock Bitcoin ETF is the most successful financial product in the history of capital markets, right? Like it is unbelievable what they were able to do with that product. I think overall adoption, understanding, and acceptance as an asset class, and from a portfolio construction perspective, the US is ahead of Brazil, right? And in my perspective, I think it's a lot given education, right? Just compare the two markets. When you think about the US market, you have probably 40 to 50 companies dedicated to Bitcoin or crypto, large public companies producing content, speaking on the news every single day, hosting events, engaging their investor base, right? You go through 12 miners, 7 or 8 Bitcoin treasury companies, all the exchanges, all the infrastructure plays. So like you add that up, we're close to 30, 40 listed companies And we have all the private companies as well. Swan Bitcoin is one, but we have River, Strike, Unchained, and all the educators, the podcasters, the community leaders. So it's a much more dynamic industry, which I think it led to more acceptance at the institutional level. And we've seen finance titan after finance titan accepting Bitcoin. Ray Dalio is one of them, Larry Fink, even James Dimon, that for many, many, many years was totally against, is now kind of accepting it. And Fidelity, one of the largest financial institutions in the US, has been providing Bitcoin services since 2017. So I think all those players together, they actually move the needle to the point that we have an administration that is pro-Bitcoin, pro-digital assets, and has accelerated adoption. On the other hand, I think regulation is lower in the US than in Brazil. Right, ETFs only were approved in the US in 2024. They have been around in Brazil since 2021. The banks have only been allowed to custody Bitcoin in recent months. Itaú has been selling Bitcoin out of your checking account for more than a year. So that's kind of an interesting difference because overall acceptance, I think the US is ahead, but in terms of regulation and being more open and companies like large institutions providing Bitcoin services, I think Brazil is ahead. It's funny, like when will Bank of America sell you Bitcoin out of your checking account? Probably will take another 2, 3, 4, 5 years. That's already reality in Brazil. The largest banks allow you to buy Bitcoin out of your daily checking account. So I think that's a little bit of what I've seen across the two markets.
Yeah, that's a really interesting distinction, right? Because you have all these banks here in Brazil that are offering these services, but you don't necessarily have like the full like demand, or at least the rush from the institutional investor community to really go. And so it's really going to like purchase these products, right? So it still seems to be more like a kind of a retail driven market in Brazil, even though like a lot more of these products are available on the institutional front, but just because they're available doesn't mean people are going to go and buy them necessarily. It also seems like there's kind of like this mindset amongst, the Brazilian kind of financial community of like everyone kind of just thinks in terms of, fixed income, variable income products, right? And obviously it's like you can make, 15%, risk-free, basically just investing in fixed income, then, it's tougher to really go up the risk curve a little bit. I mean, do you see that mentality? I mean, I guess, do you agree with that statement? And, if so, do you see that mentality maybe like changing a bit as people like learn a bit more about what Bitcoin is?
Yeah, I think it has to change, right? I think it will evolve, and we hope to be part of it. But yes, on one end, you're making 15% per year risk-free, but is it really risk-free? When you check the currency has devalued against the dollar at an extremely fast pace. And when you compare that against Bitcoin, don't even talk about it, right? So yes, the local risk-free rate can give you 15% per year. Bitcoin has given you 75% per year in BRL terms over the past few years. So at the end of the day, every single portfolio manager is trying to increase their allocation. Like they're trying to increase their AUM, they're trying to generate alpha, they're trying to generate returns. And it is unquestionable that Bitcoin has been the best asset in terms of returns over the past 10 to 15 years. So, and what is interesting about Bitcoin, and that's not me saying it, that has been said by Hal Finney and others for over a decade, that every single day that goes by, Bitcoin is stronger and the price should go higher, right? Like every single day that the network is running, that uptime is all-time high, that the hash rate is evolving, that adoption is spreading out is another reason to reprice Bitcoin up because the network is stronger. So I think as time goes by, all the critiques and the questions and the uncertainties about this new network, they dissipate, and the value proposition will be clear, and more people will be transitioning from standard portfolio allocations to a more dynamic one. Bitcoin becomes the hurdle rate, essentially.
And maybe tying all this back into OranjeBTC. I mean, you guys are live now. I see you've been continuing to acquire more Bitcoin. It seems like every week you're buying more Bitcoin. I can't even keep track of how many you guys have now, but something like 3,600 or 3,700. But like, what's next for you guys? What are you working on now? Like, what's, the educational stuff you're talking about? Like, maybe what's kind of the roadmap or the game plan for that?
Let's start with the Treasury first. That's all. So we have right now 3,701 BTC. So we have been buying Bitcoin every single week. We bought Bitcoin the last 3 weeks. We plan to continue to do so, right? Buy more Bitcoin, strengthening our treasury, and building what we believe it'll be extremely strategic as a reserve currency for the future. So we'll continue to do so, and we've seen what Saylor in the US and others around the globe have done. They not only have issued equity, so in Brazil could be a follow-on. We also have some shares in Treasury that we can eventually sell into the market to accumulate more Bitcoin. But we're going to also explore debt issuance, right? You can do convertible notes, you can issue prefers, you can think about other instruments that allow you to increase the amount of Bitcoin per share and increase the amount of Bitcoin treasury in a way that is accretive to all shareholders. So that's a key piece of the mandate. We'll continue to do so. On the educational front, everyone should expect to see a lot coming from us. So our first paper, I think we're going to be live by end of this week or early next week. Was written by Sam Callahan, who is our director of Bitcoin strategy and research. It is just an in-depth paper on how treasury companies work. He goes back to England almost 100 years ago, just to explain how this all began with gold and how it's evolving to a different asset class. So it's a pretty interesting paper. Not too long after dropping the first paper, we're going to publish one about Bitcoin itself. Again, we're hardcore Bitcoiners. We believe that everyone should have some Bitcoin in cold storage and take the time to understand the asset class. So we're going to issue that research paper as well in a few weeks. And then we have a third one that we're working on that is quite special, that is much more Brazil focused, right? We're going to talk a little about Latin America and what's going on in this market and talking about the economy and how Bitcoin could play a role. So these are 3 of the papers that are coming out. We're going to continue to do a lot of podcasts. We're going to have a very robust social media presence. We're hosting our first event, Bitcoin only, focused on institutions, on November 6th in Sao Paulo. So Aaron, you're more than invited to join us for that event. If anyone from your audience would like to join us, let us know. We can find a few tickets for your subscribers. And then early next year, we'll start to launch more of a programmatic set of content, digital and in person, about Bitcoin and economy, politics, network, and all that stuff. So this is all on the pipe for us, a lot of educational content, and that's where we plan to spend most of our time over the upcoming years, building a big Bitcoin community in Brazil, providing best-in-class content for both who's just starting and has no idea about finance or Bitcoin, or for more sophisticated institutional investors, but also, in the meantime, growing our Bitcoin treasury as high and as fast as possible.
Love the vision, love the mission, and I love how you guys are like really hitting the ground running here and getting to work. Maybe like just to kind of wrap up here, I don't want to front run your the last paper that you discussed too much, but like, what's your long run vision or prediction for like how Bitcoin will ultimately impact Brazil, Latin America in 10, 20 years if we do enter into this kind of Bitcoin standard world that you're referencing?
I think it's transformational. I really have high hopes that Brazil will be one of the first nations, one of the largest nations to adopt this asset. Look, if you're thinking long term, Bitcoin will win from my perspective, right? And it's funny that people think, hey, how high Bitcoin can go and how this would happen and where the money would come from. Just pay attention to what happened to gold, right? Gold gained $10 trillion in market cap over the past 12 months. It went from an asset class that was around 18 to $20 trillion and is now sitting around 28 to $30 trillion. That happened in a matter of one single year. And now there is even a name for that trade. It's a debasement trade. Bitcoiners have been running that trade for almost 15 years now, and there was no name, right? People thought it was speculation and it was a high risk asset, and now there's a name for the trade. And that's happening because investors and savers around the globe are losing their confidence on central banks, given the level of debt that we have across the largest economies. So when confidence is gone, savers and investors are looking for where to store their wealth. Gold has moved because gold has a 5,000-year track record. But one day my kids and your kids will look at us and say, are you kidding me? At a point in time, people used to dig rocks and then clean it up and put it back in the ground. And that has been going on for 5,000 years. We're now in a digital world. Every single person being born today, they're already born after Bitcoin. So I think adoption will accelerate. This new generation is fully digital and they will have no issues understanding how a digital ledger works. And big nations will eventually adopt. It's mind-blowing the US kind of being the first one to take the step because they had all the incentives to be the last one to do it. But again, if you're trying to keep your edge, if you're trying to protect your position, being the first mover has a massive beneficial advantage. And OranjeBTC is trying to be the first mover in this massive economy. And I hope that Brazil, as a country with 215 million people, take the same step. And that would transform the country in a very positive cycle from my perspective. And it will be an example for the world.
Yeah, and I think people, when people looking at these Bitcoin Treasury companies, this is only the tip of the iceberg, right? We're talking about coming down the pipeline. We have the Bitcoin strategic reserves, which realized in the US, the Bitcoin strategic reserve was maybe not, kind of disappointed some people, I guess, based on
so far, right? Let's get
but so far, it's we're
I take the disappointment side, but I'm open-minded that it's been only a few months.
But we've got, this is directionally where things are going, right? And, we're seeing central banks hoarding a lot more gold on their balance sheet. It's well, how long until they start putting Bitcoin on their balance sheet and their reserves, right? So it's not just corporations, it's not just individuals, it's nation states, it's central banks, it's all these folks. And there's a lot of room to run here. We really, it's a meme at this point, but it's hey, we really are still early in this whole thing, right? So Guy, really appreciate your time today. Really, wishing you lots of success on what you're doing. I really appreciate and admire the vision and just the tenacity you have and just really kind of going all in on this vision. How can folks find you if they want to connect, and where can they go to learn more?
Thank you so much, Aaron, for the time. It's a pleasure to talk to you and your audience a little bit more about Orange and Bitcoin. If people want to follow us, check us out at first our website, OranjeBTC.com. We're also on Twitter at OranjeBTC. Instagram, we're taking our account off the ground at OranjeBTC as well. And if you want to follow me, it's at Gui Amado Gomes. Is reading right here, both on Twitter and Instagram. We're just getting started. We want to build a large community of people who want to see Bitcoin succeed at the national level. OranjeBTC is just another vehicle, is one company helping to spread the word and accumulate the coins and eventually deliver products and service to that community. We have high ambitions and we love to have you and your follow base helping us along the way. So it's a pleasure to be here and I hope to be back soon.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Guy. I really appreciate it. And thanks everyone for watching, and we will see you next episode.